Kicking off the list at number 10, Arthur Conan Doyle the Psychic. We love psychics. In 1912, Arthur Conan Doyle, who you may know as the author of the Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, did some sleuthing through time and space. Yeah, you heard me. He wrote a story called Danger, which revolved around the fictional nation of Norland attacking Britain. Norland starved Britain into submission throughout the use of submarines. Now, the story overall describes a need for some kind of tunnel, otherwise Britain would fall. This story sparked public discourse, though there were skeptics such as Admiral C.C. Penrose Fitzgerald, who wrote, "I myself do not think that any civilized nation will torpedo unarmed and defenseless merchant ships." Alas, World War I arrived, and he would eat his words. On February 18th, 1915, Germany announced that every British merchant ship entering the British waters would be destroyed. Then in May 1915, the transatlantic linear Lusitania was torpedoed on its way to Britain, and 1,200 people died. Needless to say, it was a tragedy, of course, but it's interesting that Norland sounds a lot like Germany, and his story was released before the war even started. That's wild. He's like a Nostradamus. He predicted his own. That's like the Simpsons, who predict the real life stuff in their episodes. He kind of did that.
Number 9, Mata Hari, the 27-year-old Dutch dancer who became a spy. You heard me. Born in 1876, Mata Hari, real name Margaretha Zell, married an army captain when she was 18 years old. Now, the marriage was horrible. This guy was violent. Oh, I'm sorry. It didn't work, obviously. So Mata Hari, she split. She hit the road and decided she wanted to live like a colorful butterfly in the sun. But just what does that entail? Well, at age 27, Mata moved to Paris and reinvented herself as an artiste. She tapped into her Dutch roots and started performing dance acts under the alias Lady Grisha MacLeod. She was the first dancer to go nude. It was a big deal. Her show, of course, got packed. She was the talk of many towns, and for years she would travel to Europe and perform to these sold-out crowds. But the most important factor here is the guys who would come out and watch. These military officers and aristocrats would give her gifts, anything they could. They loved her. And she loved moving around and dating these men. She was living her best life. Around 1914, she was a little older, around 40 years old, so the knees were starting to feel it, and also the war broke out. So that's a lot to deal with. Hari ended up being sent back to Holland at this point, was later approached by Karl Kromer, German consul in Amsterdam, because the men she was in contact with were considered a valuable asset. So she went from being a dancer to a spy. Codename H21.
Number 8. Dr. Dolittle. Now it's time for a game called Let's Make Taylor Cry. Let's do it. The origin of Dr. Dolittle, with exception, this one does actually make sense. See, war is no place for kids, obviously. Even if they love battleships, boats, planes, whatever the case may be, it's no place for kids. Author Hugh Lofting promised that he would tell his children what it was like fighting in the war. However, the world of warfare entirely changed and introduced an entirely new horror, trench warfare. So instead he came up with the character of Dr. Dolittle, a physician in the trenches who could, well, you guessed it, talk to animals. Not only did the stories delight his children, but they also kept the spirits of his fellow soldiers up. I didn't know this. This is very amazing. This is emotional. One soldier even said that his stories saved his sanity whilst in the trenches. Hugh himself was a very shy, recluse man, and he found his voice through Dolittle, who could do the things that he could not. Throughout his life, Lofting suffered through mental illness and the death of his loved ones, but it was always his love for his family and animals, of course, that brought him back.
Number 7. Adrian Cotton DeWalt. I love this guy. I actually do know this one, sorry. Over the course of 6 decades and 4 wars, Lieutenant General Adrian Cotton DeWalt, I have to say it like that, sorry, survived the impossible multiple times. He considered one of the most dedicated soldiers of all time because, for starters, after he lost his left hand and his left eye, Adrian did not retire. In fact, the British Army officer went on to experience 10 more horrible injuries. As World War I broke out in November 1914, Carton was serving. He was opposing the forces of the Dervish state. In doing so, he was shot in the arm and face, and that's how he lost his left eye. But a grim detail shared by Lord Ismay, who served alongside the soldier, said in 1964 that the doctor at the time couldn't do anything about his eye, so he must have been in pure agony. I didn't know that. Poor guy. But also, he's such a badass. Lord Ismay continues to believe that losing his eye was a blessing in disguise, because the incident allowed for Adrian to relocate to Europe, where even more action was waiting for him. Once stationed in Europe, Adrian received more gunshot wounds in the head, hand, stomach, groin, leg, and ankle, all hit by bullets. And if that's not inspiring enough, he survived numerous plane crashes and a broken back? I didn't know that! If you feel like reading more incredible details about the soldier and diplomat, there's a book on his whole life. I'm gonna read it. It's on my list. I love this stuff, man.
Number 6. USS Cyclops. The ghost ship of World War I. I'm in. The mystery of the USS Cyclops is one that continues to boggle minds all over the world. The USS Cyclops was the first of 4 class ships built for the United States Navy preceding World War I, but either on or shortly after March 4th, 1918, the ship entirely disappeared along with a crew of 306 people. Poof, gone. Now when I say what it was near, you'll probably throw your head back and be like, I get it, gotcha now. Now it makes sense. They disappeared in the area known as the Bermuda Triangle. Yeah. But still, a ship of that size disappearing without a single trace? The Bermuda Triangle had its work cut out for her. She knew what she was doing from the get-go. To this day, it remains one of the single largest loss of life in the US naval history, not involving combat of course. She was also carrying 10,800 tons of manganese ore used for munitions, so it was theorized that she was sunk by a German U-boat. But to this day, the fate of the ship remains unknown. Bermuda Triangle, phone home, let's go, let's talk, we got some questions.
Number 5, the frontline Flora Sands. We have to include this hero on our list. Flora Sands was the only British woman to fight on the front line during World War I. She was the youngest daughter of a country rector, born in North Yorkshire in 1876, raised in Suffolk. She was known for being an adrenaline junkie growing up. She rode, she shot, and most of all, she was eager to leave her hometown. I get you, it's hard. She left the countryside for London and ended up working in Cairo for a little bit. When she returned home to England, she learned how to drive, got herself a badass race car, and joined a shooting club. On her time off, she would train as a nurse too, just in case you weren't already impressed. Now, when 1914 rolled around, Flora was 38, and she immediately signed up as a volunteer to the St. John Ambulance Service and traveled to Serbia. Cut to a year later, Flora was now practically fluent in Serbian, so she transferred to the Serbian Red Cross, where she served on the front line, because yeah. Eventually she was pushed to fight on the field, and at this time, the Serbian army was one of the only ones that allowed women to fight. Serbia? Yeah, okay. If you can do the job, do the job. And Flora fought. She rose to sergeant major, spread the word of the Serbian army, and all that she's been able to do to help, became a celebrity basically. But during a fight in Macedonia, Flora was injured by a grenade. But did she live?
She died later, but she's 80. She was like older.
Oh, she was old. Okay, cool. You go, Flora.
Number 4, a fake France. How in the heck do you keep a city that has over 2,000 years of history safe from one of the worst wars the world has ever seen? Well, simple. You build a fake one. Yeah, that's right, of course. A fake Paris. How easy. Just the Paris down the street, sans mustard. Basically a real-life version of a souvenir snow globe. Now, a few months towards the end of World War I, Paris basically had a twin. The two cities of love. Military strategists were tired of seeing their beautiful city get destroyed, so they created a decoy. They built a life-size mock-up a few miles west of the actual city in order to protect it. They settled on an area just outside of the Masons Lafitte, which was nestled in the bend of the Seine, just like Paris, which is pretty neat. Today you can visit Masons Lafitte as an upmarket retreat because even though it's a fake Paris, it can still be just as expensive. That's how they do it. They built literal carbon copies of factories, iconic pieces like the Champs, entirely empty just for show. They even set up trick lights to make it look like trains were moving at night. The French put on a full-scale version of what Kevin did in his house in Home Alone. Kevin would be pretty proud.
Number 3, No Man's Land. We mentioned trench life earlier in this list, so naturally I have to expand on the patch in between trenches. No Man's Land. The Smithsonian says there were tales circulating around these trenches over time. Apparently, deserters lived in No Man's Land. What? From both sides? They were said to dig tunnels deeper and deeper, and only at night would they come out to scavenge off the dead. What? These tales began around 1920 when a British cavalryman, Ardern Arthur Hulme Beeman, wrote about these German prisoners who would seemingly disappear into the trenches with other deserters. His officers then told him there won't be a search party because no living man shall be sent to the ghouls among the moldering dead. That's what? That's wild. I couldn't. What? Poet Wilfred Owen described the land like the face of the moon, chaotic, crater-ridden, uninhabitable, awful, the abode of madness. I read a book once where like a vampire lived in the World War, and it was really cool. So maybe that's what this was about. Vampires are real.
Number 2. Sergeant Stubby. Okay, another round of let's see if Taylor cries tears of goodness this time. Because we're talking about one amazing doggo. Sergeant Stubby was a real dog with real ambition. Oh, my heart. Air Bud played basketball. Stubby saved lives, so getting dunked on, kid. He was a member of the 102 Infantry of the 26th Yankee Division. Private Robert Conroy found this little brindle puppy that he decided to call Stubby because of his short tail. Animals weren't allowed on the base, but this doggo stole everyone's hearts, and he also took names. Yeah, he trained with them. He trekked through the barbed wire, even learned a little doggy salute. Hit that like button. Conroy smuggled him into the front lines, and even after he was discovered, nobody had the heart to let him go. Of course, they brought him to the front lines, and Stubby saved life after life. Real life. Okay, he was injured twice, the first time by a gas attack. After he recovered, he had a heightened sensibility towards gas, which resulted in saving dozens of fellow troops from an attack that he sensed. He rescued fallen soldiers on the battlefield following the sound of English calls, even capturing an enemy spy. After this incident, he was promoted to Sergeant Stubby. My man. St. Stubby served and survived 17 battles, staying with Conroy even after the war. He finally passed away in 1926. The service was complete. Honestly, I knew he was gonna pass away, but it still hurt.
Number 1, spy fever. I just watched James Bond the other night, it's true I did, and now I'm in spy mode. Are they out there? Is Taylor a spy? Probably, we'll never know. Probably he is. Dead letter drops were used so spies could pass on documents or money, and what would happen is, you would find a hollowed out brick somewhere. It had to be public too to make it seem less spy kitty. So these spies would remove a brick from a wall, leave a note in it, put it back, and just continue throughout the day. Dead letter drops weren't only bricks either. If it was indoors, instead of a brick in the wall, it would be a hollowed out book, or the back plate of a mirror. This was so common that around 1914 the civilians developed something called spy fever, where you were paranoid that there was a spy in your nation. Especially the early days of World War I, people thought spies were everywhere. Make sure you check out those old thick books tonight. Could have a tape recorder in there, listening to you while you read 50 Shades of Grey. Ooh, you spicy girl.
Number 10, working in general. I know. World War I, 1914 to 1918. If you didn't guess already, this wasn't the age of women, or at least treating them right. Just wasn't. This, however, was the beginning of things changing. The war had a lot to do with that. When men went off to war, women had to fill their shoes in places of work, when in reality, a few years prior to that, a woman working was a ridiculous idea. But what's a gal gonna do when she's got no choice? Knuckle up, buckle down, and do it, do it, do it. It might seem silly today to even mention women going to work, but this is good history. In the beginning of women's suffrage, really the middle of it. Number 9, this one's really cool, I like this one, this one's crazy. The Radium Girls. Yes, the Radium Girls. This is just a crazy story. So, this material called radium was discovered, and its glowing properties were quickly put to work for military application. You'll find a lot of times that military service often boosts technology development. Just how it goes. So when a factory that was producing glow-in-the-dark watches for the war effort needed workers, they looked to women to stand up to the challenge. Day in, day out, these women painted with radium paint. The women were advised to keep the brushes with a fine tip by placing it between their lips. Kind of just a little lick, a little kiss kind of cute. Some women even used it on their nails, and others painted on each other. The novelty of glow-in-the-dark paint quickly wore off, however, when it proved to be very harmful to one's health, especially since the women had been ingesting the harmful paint. In the end, it was radiation sickness. One woman had it so bad her jaw simply fell off. That's not it. I saw the picture, bro. It's just gone. Number 8, the Canary Girls. A very similar story to the previous, but perhaps one you may be unfamiliar with. The Canary Girls sing a familiar tune to that of the Radium Girls, except it wasn't radioactive, but rather just TNT. How could TNT be harmful besides when it blows up, right? That's what I thought. The only trouble I've seen with TNT is when Wile E. Coyote accidentally blows himself up trying to get the Roadrunner. That's where I get all my scientific knowledge from. I'm a scientist, what can you say? Well, besides cartoon antics, TNT was quite harmful due to the chemicals that made it up. So harmful, it would make the women sick. It would turn their skin orange and hair yellow, like a big bird yellow. Yeah, that yellow. It even sadly affected children born whose mothers had been exposed to the chemicals. Canary babies, as they were so called. This is why we have work safety rules. And ladies, next time there's a global conflict, check what's in the factory first before they throw you in there. You don't want to catch any of that, that's bad for you. Number 7, ambulance driver. Chauffeurs and drivers were a man's job when cars began to take over the roads. You gotta imagine this is a time when cars are still really new. However, why use a man there when we could use him in the trenches? Many women were trained and drove ambulances from the battlefield staging area back to a safer area where doctors and nurses await your arrival. The pay wasn't great, there was lots of screaming, and a slight chance of getting shelled by German artillery. There's a part of me that always gets nervous while watching footage of this time period. Like the cars just look kind of flimsy, right? And they look like they could fall apart at any minute. And driving through the mud and the blood, top speeds only are going to be around 20 to 30 miles per hour tops. Cars get like 40 horsepower at most, which in case you didn't know is very slow. Usain Bolt on his best day runs twice that speed. I don't know, but you ever see that footage and the cars are so like, you know what I mean? Like it looks like they're gonna make it up the hill. It's weird. Number 6, nurse. I know. Yes, lots of ladies were, are, and going to be nurses. That's nothing new. And any nurse out there in the medical profession, thank you for your service. Chetty thanks you. Now, I don't need to tell anyone in the medical profession how busy a hospital floor can be on a bad night. Nurses running around, paging doctors, phones ringing, papers flying, something about a code blue. Hectic, right? Well, imagine that, but less equipment, 100 years less technology, and all else under the suppression and threat of bombardment. Great. Yeah, not so fun, right? Sure, any nurse has comfy Skechers to take her to the graveyard shift, but no nurse has blast-proof equipment to treat people in a graveyard, as this is a field hospital and this is the best they can do for the time being. Yeah, see, that's not fun. That's kind of that's unusual. Yeah, it is. Number 5, ladies of the trench. This makes sense. A lot of sense, really. And as weird and crazy as it might sound, it might have made the men feel a little bit better. Trench life was awful. Refer to my World War I videos here. They're pretty good, I promise. Mud, blood, rats, disease, sickness, machine guns, barbed wire, no man's land, chemical warfare, and sadly, when all that was done and gone, brutal, borderline, medieval hand-to-hand combat. That just must be terrible. I played Battlefield 1, that's fun, but in real life, that's just not fun. So when soldiers were taken out of rotation for a little R&R, they might be pleased to see a brothel on wheels. That's right. Or when visiting certain northern towns in France, a very legal brothel houses, if you will. When Americans joined the fight, of 1,000 men being treated in hospital, 190 were being treated for a brothel-related sickness. Go get 'em, boys. Some men would even ask for ladies who were known to possess such qualities, because they knew if they caught it, it meant 30 days in a bed and not in a trench. That's honestly such a big brain play, I can't even. Number 4, widow. Might not be an official occupation, but it is an official title, and officially, it sucks. Imagine a world where it's difficult to get by, a world where a woman is a second-class citizen. So when her husband, her brother, her father, and maybe even her son get drafted to fight Germany and don't make it back, well, it's not fun. Some struggled to find work, others remarried, and some had no choice but to practice the time-old tradition of the world's oldest profession, if you know what I mean. Tough times, man. Especially for the ladies. Not cool. Number 3, farmers. Gotta tend to those fields, partner. This is also a time where there is farm equipment, yes, but not as common as today. It would have been expensive and nowhere near the state-of-the-art farm equipment that we have today. Milking machines, combines, tractors, you name it. In 1914, it's offspring. That's your farm equipment. That's how it works. Ever notice how farmhouses got lots of bedrooms? Well, if you can't afford to hire farmhands, then you make some. Except, however, the key issue with the last point as well as here is the men in your family getting sent to war. Not coming back for 4 years is a problem. Or in a worst case scenario, not coming back at all. I mean, I'm sure some came back, they just came back in boxes. Which means wives, women, sisters, and daughters had to roll up their sleeves and get to work. And I don't have to tell any farmer watching this how important their job is, or how difficult it can be. You gotta feed the folks after all. Gotta do what's right by me, Dutch. I don't know how farming's Western, but alright. Number 2, dancer. Little bit of a stretch here, but hear me out. World War I ended in 1918. By 1920, the Allies' economies had picked up, but especially in America. This was a time of great success, as a wise man once said. The Roaring 20s, while the war was over, many folks were still feeling the effects, especially in Europe. Germany wasn't doing too hot. And they're gonna come back for a sequel. It's not gonna be good. As the sale of alcohol was banned, underground clubs began to open. Speakeasies, you may have heard them from my 20s videos. Men, soldiers returning home, women, and minorities of all backgrounds were hanging out in these places, which was very progressive and cool for the time. The ladies were becoming flappers, which were dancers, out of the factories and enjoying the luxuries of a healthy economy. And I'm sure some of it had to start in 1918 at least, because they knew the end was coming. It had to. It just had to. Trust me, it makes sense. Number 1, politicians. For the first time in a long time, women were becoming politicians. Not presidents or governors, but their voices were being heard in the political space regardless, which is huge. A one Miss Rankin was voted into the US House of Representatives in 1916. A woman's right advocate, all brought to you by women's suffrage. I don't have to tell you how unusual that really is for the time. especially for the time. Unfortunately for these ladies, while there would be some great step forwards like earning the right to vote and social progress in the 1920s, things would go back a few steps during the 40s and the 50s, and wouldn't see massive resurgence until the late 60s and 70s. You gotta remember the good stuff though, even if it's baby steps.